The night the storm came, the whole town went quiet. Angela stood at her window, wrapped in her late husband's flannel shirt, watching the world disappear. She had no family nearby, no one to call, and the clinic had closed early. Angela was alone again, same as every winter since her husband died. And then came the sound. Engines. 18 of them, roaring through the whiteout like an approaching war. The kind of engines that rattled glass and made your heartbeat quicken before your mind could catch up. Then came the knock. Heavy. Desperate. Repeated. They begged her for shelter to escape the snowstorm. Though terrified, her kind heart led her to invite them inside. She had no idea that the next morning, her act of kindness would summon 1,200 roaring motorcycles to her doorstep, changing not only her life, but an entire community forever. Before we continue, let us know where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe, because tomorrow, I've got something extra special for you. Angela Morris wasn't supposed to end up here. Not in a place like Wilsonton, Montana, a town so small that people measured distance in minutes to the nearest church. She'd been a trauma nurse for 20 years in Chicago, used to gunshots and sirens, used to saving strangers who didn't know her name. Her husband, Michael, had been a firefighter. The kind of man who ran toward burning buildings while others ran away. Until one day, he didn't make it out. The apartment had felt too small after that. Every wall whispered his name. Every siren outside dragged her back to that morning. So she packed what was left of her life into an old truck and drove west until the city skyline disappeared behind her. She told herself she was looking for peace. But really, she was just looking for a place where the world would stop reminding her of what she'd lost. The farmhouse she bought had once belonged to a rancher's widow. Faded blue paint, creaking floors, a chimney that smoked more than it should, but it was cheap, and it was quiet. Too quiet. Most days, the only voices she heard were from the local radio or the wind brushing through the pines. She kept busy, nursing at the town clinic, patching up frostbite, pneumonia, the occasional broken rib from some bar fight. But when night came and the house went still, her mind always wandered back to Michael's laugh, the sound of boots by the door, the weight of his jacket on the chair. Some nights, she'd talk to him out loud, just to fill the silence. "You'd hate it here, Mike," she'd say. "Too cold. Too white. Too quiet." And she'd laugh softly, a laugh that always turned into a sigh. The people of Wilsonton didn't mean to be cruel. They were just distant. They called her Miss Angela at church and thanked her for her service, but when the potluck rolled around, no one ever sat at her table first. The pastor's wife once complimented her hair, then asked if she'd ever considered moving back to a more familiar community. The grocery clerk double-counted her change every time. Little things. Death by 1,000 small gestures. Money was tight too. The clinic hours had been cut back, and the heating bill doubled after the first frost. She'd taken to sewing extra blankets from old flannel shirts and rationing firewood. Her hands ached from the cold, and arthritis in her right knee made every step upstairs feel like a test. But she endured. She always did. That's what nurses do. That night, the storm had been brewing since noon. By 5, the sky had turned the color of dirty steel. The wind screamed across the valley, pushing snow sideways like a punishment. Angela had just finished securing the shutters when the lights flickered, then died. The house sank into silence. She lit candles, stacked wood by the hearth, and settled in with a cup of coffee gone lukewarm. That's when she heard it, the distant rumble, deep and uneven. At first, she thought it was thunder. Then she realized it was coming closer. Louder. The unmistakable sound of motorcycles. She froze. The last thing anyone expected to see in the middle of a blizzard was a convoy of bikers. And not just any bikers. The kind with reputation heavy enough to make headlines. Hell's Angels. Or at least, that's what the patches said when she finally saw them, faded red lettering against black leather, covered in ice and snow. 18 men and women, faces buried in scarves, engines coughing through the cold. They were trying to stay upright on a road that no longer existed. Angela's first instinct was to lock the door. Every story she'd ever heard about gangs flooded her mind: violence, drugs, chaos. Her fingers trembled as she reached for the latch. But then she saw one of them stumble. Another collapsed beside their bike. And despite everything, despite the fear clawing at her gut, her nurse's heart kicked in. She grabbed her coat and went to the door. When she opened it, the wind nearly knocked her back. Snow burst inside like smoke. The man standing at her porch looked half dead, ice-crusted in his beard, hands blue even through his gloves. His voice cracked when he spoke. "Ma'am, please. We're freezing. We can't go any further." Behind him, headlights glowed faintly through the storm. She counted shapes: 16, 17, 18 riders. Some slumped against their bikes. One was on their knees, coughing. She hesitated, her mind split between terror and training. She thought of the clinic, of patients she'd saved. She thought of the old preacher who once told her, fear and faith can't live in the same heart. She didn't feel brave. Just human. And tired of being afraid of everyone. "Get them inside," she said. They moved slowly, stiffly, bringing the storm with them. Boots thudded on the wooden floor. The smell of exhaust, leather, and cold air filled the house. She guided them toward the fire, threw on more logs, handed out blankets. The leader, a broad man with a gravel voice, tried to apologize, but his lips barely moved from the cold. "Didn't mean to scare you, ma'am. We were heading to Billings when the road disappeared. We'd have frozen out there." Angela nodded, her heartbeat still wild. "You can stay until morning. Fire's all I got." For a long moment, the only sound was the crackle of wood. Then one of the younger bikers whispered, "Thank you, ma'am." Just that. Quiet. Honest. She didn't know it yet, but that whisper would echo across the country by sunrise. As the night deepened, Angela worked like it was a trauma shift again. She found towels, checked frostbite, heated broth on the stove. She moved through fear by doing what she knew best, caring for the broken. Some of the bikers fell asleep sitting up. Others took turns drying gloves over the flames. They called each other by strange names: Tank, Goose, Mama Red. When they laughed, the house felt warmer. And slowly, her fear began to loosen its grip. These weren't monsters. They were just people caught in a storm too big for them. One of them, a woman with a scar along her jaw, told her they'd been on their way to deliver Christmas toys to a shelter for vets. "PR run," she said with a tired grin. "We do it every year. Guess karma sent us a snow day." Angela smiled for the first time that night. "You picked a hell of a storm." By dawn, the fire had burned low, but no one froze. No one died. Angela sat by the window, watching faint light push through the snow clouds. The road outside was buried, but the sky looked softer, forgiving somehow. She turned to see 18 sleeping strangers on her floor, the same people she'd been taught to fear. She felt something shift inside her, a quiet recognition that maybe she'd been wrong too. About them. About this town. About herself. Then, just as she began to doze off, the ground started to tremble again. Engines. Many engines. Not 18 this time, hundreds. The sound rolled through the valley like thunder, growing louder, closer. Angela went to the window. And what she saw made her heart stop. A sea of headlights cutting through the white. Rows upon rows of bikes stretching down the hill. Jackets glinting with that same red emblem. 1,000, maybe more, Hell's Angels, riding toward her farmhouse. And she whispered to herself, "Lord, what have I done?" Before we continue, tell us where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe, because this is where the storm truly begins. At first, she thought her eyes were playing tricks on her. The snow still drifted thick and sideways, the world outside ghostly and shifting, yet those lights kept multiplying. 1 minute it was 50. Then 100. Then more. A low vibration passed through the floorboards of the old farmhouse, rattling cups on the shelf. Angela backed away from the window and pressed a hand to her chest, feeling the tremor through her ribs. She remembered the man from the night before, the one who'd called himself Hawk, though his voice had been barely more than a rasp through the cold. He and his people were still sleeping, sprawled across the floor in blankets and jackets, faces slack with exhaustion. They looked harmless now, like a pile of lumber after the fire. But outside, the storm was announcing something else. Something bigger. The noise grew until it filled the valley, an ocean of engines, a sound that didn't just echo but lived inside the bones. Angela moved to the porch and pushed open the door. The air bit into her skin, sharp enough to draw tears. Down the hill, the road was alive with motion, row after row of motorcycles moving slow through the snow, headlights glowing through the haze. The rumble had weight, like thunder that refused to fade. For a moment, she couldn't move. Her mind leapt to every warning she'd ever heard. Town gossip said the Angels were trouble, drug runners, ex-cons, anarchists. The sheriff himself had once bragged at the diner that if any of them ever showed up here, he'd show them a Montana welcome. And now there were hundreds. Maybe more. Behind her, a groan came from the floor. What the hell? Hawk's voice was gravel rubbed on steel. He pulled himself upright, blinking toward the light spilling through the doorway. When he saw what Angela saw, his face changed. It wasn't fear, exactly. It was recognition. He stood, stretched the stiffness from his limbs, and went to the door. The others stirred awake, Mama Red, Goose, Tank, the rest. They followed his gaze out into the white. One of them let out a low whistle. Word travels fast, Hawk murmured. Angela turned to him. What do you mean, travels fast? He didn't answer right away. He just rubbed a gloved hand over his face, exhaled, and said, "You saved us, ma'am." Folks talk about things like that. The Brotherhood don't forget. Brotherhood. The word hung in the cold air between them. Angela stepped back into the house, heart racing. You telling me all of those, she pointed toward the sea of lights, they're here because of last night? Hawk gave a slow nod. Looks that way. The engines began to quiet, one by one, as riders dismounted and trudged through the snow. Some carried supplies, blankets, fuel cans, food boxes strapped to their bikes. Others simply stood there, heads bowed against the wind, waiting for direction. It looked less like an invasion and more like an army answering a call. Angela shut the door, leaned against it, and tried to steady herself. Her knees felt weak. The arthritis in her right one flared with each heartbeat. The warmth of the room pressed around her like a fever. She whispered to herself, Lord, what am I supposed to do with all this? There was no answer, only the steady crackle of the fire and the shifting of boots on her floor. By mid-morning, the storm eased. The snow still fell, but softer now, almost gentle, as if nature itself had tired of its rage. Outside, the field beyond Angela's house looked like a frozen campsite, hundreds of bikes parked in careful lines, men and women huddled near makeshift fires, smoke drifting into the gray sky. The noise had settled into a low hum of voices and engines idling for warmth. The Angels had come prepared. Trucks loaded with fuel and generators rolled in behind the main convoy. Some of the younger riders started clearing snow around the porch, stacking wood from a pickup. Others unloaded crates of food, canned soup, coffee, protein bars, setting them neatly by the steps. It was strangely organized, almost military. Angela watched from the window, still unable to reconcile the scene before her. The people she'd let in last night weren't criminals to these newcomers, they were kin. And she, somehow, had become part of their story. When Hawk came back inside, his beard was crusted with frost. They're setting up camp, he said. Won't stay long. Roads should open by tomorrow if the plows make it through. Angela nodded slowly. And until then? He looked at her with a kind of quiet respect. Until then, ma'am, we make sure you're taken care of. You didn't have to open that door last night, but you did. You took us in when nobody else would. That matters. She wanted to tell him she hadn't done it for thanks, or for loyalty, or for whatever it was that bound these people together. She'd done it because she couldn't bear to watch anyone freeze to death on her porch. But the words stuck in her throat. Instead, she simply said, "You're welcome." For the first time since Michael's death, her house was alive. Boots clomped on the floorboards. Voices drifted through the rooms. Someone fixed the broken hinge on her back door without being asked. Another cleaned her snow-clogged gutters. Mama Red took over the kitchen like she'd been born there, brewing coffee strong enough to wake the dead. Angela tried to protest, but the older woman only smiled and said, "Sit down, honey. You've done enough for one lifetime." Angela sat. And for a little while, she let herself feel what it was like not to be alone. By afternoon, word had spread through town. The sheriff's radio cracked to life in the middle of the diner, startling half the patrons. "We got a situation out by the old Miller farmhouse," a deputy's voice said. "Looks like the angels rolled in heavy. I'm talking hundreds." The sheriff, a thick-necked man named Don Avery, put down his burger and grunted. "Hundreds? Out there? You sure?" "Affirmative. Locals are calling it a full camp." A murmur rippled through the diner. Someone muttered, "Ain't that the place where the colored nurse lives?" Another whispered, "Maybe she's in trouble." A third said, "Or maybe she brought M here." By sunset, the sheriff's cruiser was crawling up the snow-packed road toward Angela's farmhouse. Inside, the atmosphere was warm, even cheerful. The angels had set up a makeshift kitchen on her porch, passing around mugs of hot coffee and thick slices of bread. Someone had rigged a small generator to bring power back to the living room. Laughter rolled through the house, deep, hearty laughter that filled every empty corner. Angela sat by the window again, the same spot she'd stood in last night, and watched as the headlights of the sheriff's car cut through the dusk. Her stomach tightened. The cruiser stopped near the gate. 2 doors opened. Sheriff Avery and his deputy stepped out, hands resting casually on their belts. They didn't draw weapons, but they didn't smile either. Hawk noticed them first. "We got company," he said. The laughter faded. The sheriff's boots crunched up the walk. He knocked twice, then opened the door without waiting. "Evening, ma'am," he said to Angela, his tone polite in the way men are polite when they want you to know who's in charge. "Heard there's a gathering here." Angela rose to her feet, feeling the ache in her knee as she did. There was a storm. They needed shelter. Avery's gaze slid over the room, taking in the faces, the jackets, the insignias. 18 of M last night, wasn't it? And now you got what, 1,000? More like 1,200, Hawk said from behind her. We travel in numbers when family's in need. The sheriff's eyes narrowed. You planning to stay long? Just till the road's clear, Hawk replied. We'll be gone before the coffee runs out. Avery looked back at Angela. Ma'am, you got any idea who these folks really are? They're people who were freezing to death, she said quietly. That's all I needed to know. The silence stretched thin. Then Avery tipped his hat and said, well, you take care now. But if there's any trouble, don't expect the town to clean it up for you. He turned, boots grinding against the ice, and left. When the door closed, the warmth of the room felt fragile, as if one wrong word could shatter it. Hawk met Angela's eyes and gave a small nod of thanks. But she could see the worry in his face too. The kind of worry that comes when you know the world outside those walls is already writing its own story about you. By the next morning, the backlash had begun. The local paper ran a front-page story, Hell's Angels camp outside local nurse's home. Beneath it, a photo taken from the hill showed rows of bikes and the black specks of people gathered around fires. The caption read, unclear motives, residents concerned. Angela didn't have to read the comments online to know what they said. She heard the whispers when she went into town to pick up medical supplies. That woman's keeping criminals on her property. What's she hiding? Maybe she's getting paid. The pharmacist barely made eye contact when she filled Angela's prescription for painkillers. Even the pastor's wife crossed the street rather than greet her. When she returned home, she found one of her windows cracked, a rock lying beneath it, half buried in snow. No note, just anger. She didn't tell the bikers. They were already tense enough, and she didn't want to be the reason something exploded. But that night, when the fire burned low and the laughter faded, she sat alone at the kitchen table, staring at her trembling hands. Fear, she realized, wasn't gone. It had just changed shape. She thought of Michael again, how he used to tell her that courage wasn't the absence of fear but what you did despite it. You show up, he used to say. Even when it's hard. Especially then. She whispered his name, a prayer on her lips. Then she straightened her back and went to refill the coffee pots. Outside, the storm clouds were breaking apart, revealing a bruised purple sky. The mountains glowed faintly in the distance. And beneath that sky, 1,200 bikers stood guard around her home, not threatening, not demanding, just present. None of them knew that before the week was over, that same field would become the center of a war between compassion and fear. The days that followed slipped into a strange rhythm, half peace, half waiting. The snow thawed slowly, the sun carving silver lines through the drifts, revealing the muddy earth beneath. The angels stayed put. They fixed things that hadn't worked in years, mended her fence, repaired the cracked shingles, cleaned out the shed Michael used to keep his tools in. They even rebuilt the chicken coop, though Angela hadn't owned chickens since the foxes took the last of them. To anyone else, it might have looked like generosity, but to Angela, it felt like gratitude shaped into muscle and sweat. She could tell they were trying to repay something, not just her kindness, but perhaps their own chance at redemption. Each of them carried a story behind the eyes, something raw and half-buried. Mama Red told her about the son she'd lost, a boy who'd joined the military and never come home. Goose showed her a tattoo of a date on his forearm, said it was the day he'd walked out of prison and decided he'd never go back. Even Hawk, quiet and deliberate as ever, had moments when his guard slipped, when he stared at the horizon too long, or ran his hand through his hair like a man remembering something he couldn't change. Angela had seen that look before. In hospital corridors. In her husband's mirror before his heart gave out. It was the look of people haunted by what they didn't say when they still had time. Each night, they gathered by the fire. They told stories, wild, brutal ones sometimes, but threaded with laughter and pain so human it almost hurt to listen. Angela didn't join in, but they always saved her a seat near the flames, a cup of coffee warm in her hands. She began to think of them not as strangers but as echoes of something she'd lost, a family of sorts, built from ruin. But beyond that field, the world was changing shape. The sheriff's warning had spread like frost through town. People whispered that the angels were recruiting, stockpiling weapons, plotting something. Rumors bloomed in the space where truth was too quiet to defend itself. Some claimed the governor had been alerted, others said the National Guard was on standby. Angela didn't believe it, not at first. Then came the drones. Small, silent things that hovered above the property, blinking red in the dark. The bikers cursed and waved them off, but more appeared each night, circling like vultures. Hawk ordered his men not to engage, but their restraint only fed the hysteria. By morning, the headlines screamed, paramilitary gathering in Montana, authorities on edge. Angela's phone rang non-stop. Reporters, church leaders, even her old supervisor from the hospital. Some were worried, others were not so kind. One voice hissed through the static, "You've disgraced your profession. You're harboring criminals." She hung up, hands shaking. When she told Hawk, he just nodded, jaw tight. "They don't like what they don't understand," he said. She looked at him, at the scars on his knuckles, the deep lines at the corners of his eyes, and thought, neither do I. The tension thickened like storm clouds reborn. One evening, just as the last light fell over the valley, 2 black SUVs pulled up beyond the gate. Men in suits stepped out, their shoes sinking into the mud. They didn't knock this time. They called her name, sharp and official. Angela stepped onto the porch, coat pulled tight against the cold. The taller one flashed a badge. Federal. Homeland Security. He spoke with practiced calm. "Ma'am, we need to talk about your guests." "They're not my guests," she said quietly. "They're my responsibility." His eyes flicked toward the field. "That's not how it looks from where I'm standing." She told them about the storm, about the night she opened her door to save lives. But the agent's face didn't change. He wasn't here for truth, he was here for control. "Ma'am, you're harboring members of a registered organization with a violent history. If they don't disperse within 48 hours, this property will be considered a site of unlawful assembly." Angela stared at him. "Unlawful assembly? They're eating soup and fixing fences." He didn't answer. Just handed her a folded piece of paper, an official warning, and turned back toward his car. The second man lingered a moment, his expression softer. "For what it's worth," he said quietly, "you're not the first good person to get caught in the middle of something big." Then they were gone, leaving tire tracks like scars in the snow. Hawk read the paper that night. His face was unreadable. "They'll come back," he said. "And next time, they won't bring paper." Angela felt something heavy settle in her chest, not fear this time, but inevitability. Still, she couldn't ask them to leave. Not after all they'd done. Not after the way the town had turned its back. If she sent them away now, it would feel like betrayal, not just of them, but of herself. That night, she couldn't sleep. The wind moaned through the cracks of the house, and the distant hum of engines lulled her in and out of uneasy dreams. She dreamed of Michael again, standing in the field, calling her name through the snow. When she reached for him, he vanished, leaving only the echo of his voice. "You show up, Angie. That's what you do." At dawn, she rose and made coffee for all of them. The angels were already awake, their camp running with the quiet discipline of people who'd lived through worse. She walked among them, offering cups, listening to their laughter. The cold air bit at her cheeks, but she didn't mind. She felt alive in a way she hadn't in years. That sense of fragile peace lasted until noon, when the first protesters arrived. They came in pickup trucks, waving flags and shouting through bullhorns. A crowd of maybe 30 at first, mostly locals from town. They lined up by the fence, yelling for the bikers to go back where they came from. Some carried signs that said, "No gangs in our county," and "Protect our children." Angela stood on the porch, heart pounding. Hawk ordered his people to stay calm, to keep their distance. But words have a way of cutting deeper than knives. "You brought this on us, lady," someone shouted. "You and your criminals." Another voice, "You're a disgrace to this town." She clenched her fists, nails digging into her palms. Every instinct told her to shout back, to defend herself, but something inside whispered restraint. She had learned, in hospitals and funerals and nights of silent grief, that yelling never cured anything. So she stood still. The angels did too. Silent. Immovable. Like stones in the snow. Eventually, the protesters grew bored. They spat a few more insults and left, engines roaring down the road. But the damage was done. Angela went inside and closed the door, her breath trembling. When she turned, Hawk was standing there. "You don't have to face that alone," he said quietly. She shook her head. "They're scared. That's all. Fear turns to hate faster than people think," he replied. And he was right. Within days, the protests doubled. Then tripled. Strangers showed up with cameras, live streaming, turning the quiet valley into a spectacle. Reporters pushed microphones toward Angela's face, asking if she sympathized with criminals, if she was part of the movement. She stopped answering her phone. She stopped going into town. The house became both refuge and prison, filled with the hum of engines and the weight of judgment. Then, one morning, Hawk disappeared. No one saw him leave. His bike was gone, his sleeping bag folded neatly by the wall. Mama Red said he'd gone to talk to someone in town, to smooth things over. But when he didn't return by nightfall, unease spread like wildfire through the camp. Angela waited by the window, staring down the empty road. Every hour that passed stretched her nerves thinner. When dawn finally came, she saw headlights in the distance. One bike, moving slow. Hawk. But as he got closer, she saw the blood. His face was swollen, his jacket torn. He could barely stay upright. The angels ran to meet him, lifting him off the bike. He tried to speak, but his voice came out broken. "They ambushed me," said to send a message. Angela pressed a towel to his head, tears burning her eyes. "Who did this?" He looked at her, eyes dull with exhaustion. "Locals. Couple deputies, too." And that was the moment the air changed. The angel's patience snapped like a frozen branch. Rage moved through the camp, silent at first, then roaring. They wanted blood. Justice. Revenge. Angela could feel it in the ground, in the tension of the engines firing to life. She tried to stop them, standing between the porch and the bikes. Her voice cracked, pleading. "Please, don't give them what they want." But her words were swallowed by the growl of engines. Hawk, barely conscious, grabbed her wrist. "Let them go," he whispered. "They need to feel it." She looked at him, this broken man, this leader who had brought light into her loneliness, and realized she was losing him to something older and darker than pain. The angels roared out of the field, a black river of fury cutting through the snow. And as their taillights vanished into the distance, Angela stood alone on the porch, the wind stinging her face, and whispered the only prayer she knew: "God, keep them from becoming what the world already thinks they are." She didn't know it yet, but that night would mark the first crack in everything, in her faith, in her town, in the fragile peace she'd built with strangers who had become family. The storm had only seemed to end. Inside her house, and across the valley, it was just beginning again. The sound of the engines faded into the storm, swallowed by distance and rage. Then came silence, the kind that presses against the chest and makes you listen for something that isn't coming back. Angela stood there for a long time, the cold seeping through her slippers, the wind tugging at her hair. In that silence, she could almost hear Michael's voice again, the steady, calm tone he used when the ER turned bloody and loud. "You keep your head, Angie. You don't lose it just because everyone else has." But tonight, that voice was far away. Inside, the house felt emptier than it ever had. Hawk lay unconscious on the couch, the firelight flickering against his bruised skin. Mama Red sat nearby, a knife in her lap, muttering prayers under her breath. The rest of the camp was ghostly quiet, 18 men who didn't know if they were waiting for news or for war. Angela's hands wouldn't stop shaking. She wasn't sure if it was from cold or fear or the knowledge that she might have just lost every ounce of peace she'd built since coming to this place. By morning, the news had spread. The local radio announced an incident in town, property damaged, vehicles overturned, several injured. The sheriff gave a statement blaming violent retaliation by known motorcycle affiliates. He didn't mention the beating that caused it. He didn't mention Hawk. He didn't mention deputies swinging batons in the dark. Angela turned off the radio before the anger in her chest burned too hot to contain. When the first of the angels returned, their faces were blank. No triumph, no apology. Just exhaustion. A few were limping. One carried a torn jacket stained dark. None of them would say what had happened, only that Hawk's message had been delivered. He woke later that day, groggy and bandaged. Angela sat beside him, trying to find the right words, but before she could speak, he whispered, "You shouldn't have stayed. I wasn't going to leave you." "You should have," he said. "This isn't your fight." But it was, in a way. She'd opened the door. She'd chosen compassion. She'd made herself part of their storm. And now the town, her town, was deciding what to do about it. That evening, the first rock hit her window. It cracked the glass near the kitchen sink, sharp enough to make her jump. When she looked out, she saw 3 teenagers running back toward the road, laughing. A note was tied around the rock. It read, "Go back to where you came from." Angela stared at the words for a long time. The handwriting was messy, the anger young. But the message was ancient, older than the town, older than snow, older than hate itself. She taped the window shut and went back to tending Hawk's wounds. 2 days later, someone spray-painted her clinic. "Traitor," in bright red letters across the door. She found it when she went into town for supplies. People stared as she scrubbed it off with her bare hands. No one offered to help. By the time she returned home, Hawk was sitting outside, a blanket over his shoulders, watching the sunset. "They're scared," she said quietly. "So are you." "Yes," she admitted. "But fear's never been a good enough reason for me to stop doing what's right." He smiled, faintly. "You sound like my mother." Was she stubborn too? The worst. He chuckled, then winced. "She always said the only thing worth anything in this life is what you're willing to lose for someone else." Angela looked out at the field, where the angels' tents fluttered in the fading light. "Sounds like a woman I'd have liked to meet." "Yeah," Hawk said softly. "She'd have liked you too." For a moment, the world felt small again. Manageable. Two souls trading fragments of truth while the rest of the earth spun itself into noise. But peace never stayed long around Angela Morris. That night, she heard tires crunching over the snow. Then headlights flooded her yard. Not bikes this time, trucks. Sheriff vehicles. Hawk's men moved fast, forming a line near the fence. The sheriff stepped out, his breath fogging in the air. His hand rested on his holster. "Evening, Ms. Morris," he said, his tone dripping with false civility. "You mind calling your guests off before this gets ugly?" Angela came down the steps slowly, coat pulled tight. "You came here with guns," she said. "Seems to me it's already ugly." He smiled, that politician's smile that never reached the eyes. "We just want to chat. About what happened in town. About some damage done. About the fact that one of your friends is wanted for questioning." "Hawk?" she asked. He didn't answer. Just nodded toward the men behind him, who were already unhooking a pair of handcuffs. Hawk stepped forward, bruised but defiant. "You'll have to charge me with something real," he said. "Oh, we can make it real," the sheriff replied. Angela's heart pounded. She wanted to step between them, to reason, but she could see it in their faces, reason was done here. The angels tensed. The sheriff's men gripped their weapons. One heartbeat too long, and it would have erupted. Then Hawk did something no one expected. He lifted his hands, slow and deliberate. "It's all right," he said to his brothers. "Let it be." They arrested him in silence. Angela watched as they led him to the car, snow crunching under boots, headlights slicing through the dark. For a moment, he looked back at her. Just a glance. Enough to say don't lose yourself too. And then he was gone. The next day, the town paper ran the headline, "Biker leader arrested after violent outburst, local woman under investigation." The clinic called. Her supervisor said the board was concerned about her judgment. She'd been suspended pending review. She hung up without answering. By nightfall, the camp began to dissolve. Some of the angels stayed, but most packed up and left, promising to return when they knew more. Mama Red hugged her hard, pressing something into her palm, a silver pendant shaped like a feather. "You'll need this," she said. "For luck." When they were gone, the silence was unbearable. The field that had been alive with engines and laughter now lay empty and scarred. Angela sat by the fire that night, staring at the flames until her eyes burned. Every choice she'd made had brought her here, alone, broke, branded, and without the one man who'd made her feel seen since Michael died. She wondered if she'd been wrong all along. If compassion had limits. If decency was something only fools still believed in. Then came the knock at the door. She froze. For a moment, she thought it might be Hawk. But when she opened it, it was her brother, Derek. She hadn't seen him in 2 years. Not since the funeral. Surprised, he said, stepping inside without waiting for permission. She stared at him, same face, same restless energy. But his eyes were harder now. What are you doing here? Heard about your mess, he said. Thought I'd check in before the feds take your house. She frowned. They're not taking anything. He shrugged, looking around. You sure about that? Word is, they're planning to seize the property under some anti-gang law. Asset forfeiture, or whatever they call it. Angela's stomach twisted. That's not possible. Everything's possible when you piss off the right people. He walked to the mantel, picked up Michael's old lighter. You always did pick the losing side, Angie. Mom said you had a bleeding heart. Guess she was right. She bit her tongue, fighting the anger rising in her throat. If you came here to gloat. I came here, he cut in, because you still owe me money. The words hit like a slap. Money, she whispered. He smiled, cruel and familiar. Michael's insurance. You said you'd help me get back on my feet. Never happened. But I figure now's a good time to collect, before the state freezes your accounts. She stared at him in disbelief. You're unbelievable. He shrugged again. Maybe. But I'm not stupid. People in town are saying you're helping terrorists. You really want to end up in jail because you can't mind your own business? Something inside her cracked then. Years of swallowing pride, of biting back, of choosing peace over truth. It all came rushing up. You don't get to talk about business, she said, voice shaking. You stole from Mom. You left when Michael died. You didn't even call. Derek's smirk faded. Don't act holy, Angie. You think you're better than the rest of us because you patch up drunks and thugs for a living? I think I'm better than someone who walks into his sister's house and demands money while her life's falling apart. They stared at each other across the firelight, two people bound by blood but nothing else. Then he said the thing that would break her completely. You know, he said softly, if Michael hadn't died, he'd have left you anyway. He told me once. Said you were too cold. Too much like a nurse even at home. The word struck like ice water. She didn't speak. Didn't move. Just watched him turn and walk out, his boots crunching over the snow. When the door closed, the silence inside was unbearable. She sank to the floor, the pendant from Mama Red still in her hand. For the first time since Michael's death, she wept without restraint, the kind of crying that tears something loose inside you. That night, she almost didn't wake up. She'd left the fire burning low, the cold creeping in. When dawn broke, her body ached, her throat raw, her head heavy. She stared at the ceiling, the rafters swimming above her, and thought, what if I just stopped trying? But then she heard the faint rumble of engines in the distance. Not many this time. Just two. She dragged herself to the window and looked out. Two bikes parked near the gate. The riders dismounted, walking slow. One of them carried something wrapped in a tarp. When they reached the porch, she opened the door. They looked at her with the same solemn respect she'd seen at funerals. Ma'am, one said softly. We got word from Hawk. Her breath caught. Is he? He's alive. Locked up in county for now. Said to give you this. They handed her the tarp. Inside was a worn leather jacket, his. The one he'd been wearing that first night when they knocked on her door. On the back, the wings of the angels gleamed faintly under the morning light. Angela ran her fingers over the leather, and for the first time in days, she felt something solid beneath her grief, not peace, not yet, but purpose. The men saluted her, then left without another word. When they were gone, she stood on the porch holding that jacket, the wind biting at her face, and whispered, "All right, Michael. I'll keep showing up." What she didn't know was that this act, this quiet vow in the cold, would ripple far beyond her little farmhouse. Because while she was standing there, across the country, phones were lighting up. Social media posts spreading. Photos of the black nurse who sheltered outlaws in a blizzard. Hashtags multiplying. Messages of support pouring in from people she'd never met. And somewhere in a federal office, a man in a suit looked at the screen and said, "We might have a problem." The story wasn't over. It was only just shifting, from survival to reckoning, from solitude to the beginning of something that would soon shake the walls of that quiet Montana town. The storm had taken its toll. Now came the aftermath. By the time the snow began to soften, the world around Angela Morris had changed beyond recognition. What had started as an act of compassion during a storm had grown into something far larger, heavier, and more dangerous than she could ever have imagined. The betrayal still burned in her chest, the cold edge of a blade that refused to dull. For days after the police raid, the house stood silent. The engines that had once filled the air with defiant thunder were gone, leaving behind only their scars, boot prints in the thawing snow, the smell of oil, the splintered remains of the porch railing broken when the officers had pushed through. She didn't sleep much, not because she feared the bikers' return, but because she couldn't stop seeing the faces of those she'd trusted, the men who'd promised to protect her, the ones who had sworn she was one of them, as they rode away and left her to face the chaos alone. The town turned against her quickly. Some said she'd been part of it all along, a willing accomplice to whatever crimes they imagined had taken place in her house that night. Others whispered that she'd been used, that she was just a foolish woman who had believed the wrong people, opened her doors too wide. Angela stopped going into town. The grocery clerk wouldn't meet her eyes, the mailman dropped letters at the end of her driveway instead of her porch, and when she went to the church she had cleaned for years, she found the locks changed. For weeks she lived like that, cut off, hollow, her world reduced to the four walls of that house. The storm had passed, but its aftermath lingered like a bruise that wouldn't fade. Yet even in that quiet, something began to shift inside her. The same stillness that once felt suffocating started to feel like space, space to think, to breathe, to feel her own anger not as shame, but as fuel. She began writing letters, not to the bikers, not to the town, but to herself. In those letters, she told the truth as she saw it. That she hadn't invited violence into her home, she had invited life. People freezing in the snow. Strangers who had needed warmth, food, and the belief that someone in the world still saw them as human. She wrote that she didn't regret it. Not one bit. Even after everything. Because deep down, she understood something no one else in that town ever would, that compassion and chaos often walk hand in hand, and that kindness, once given, can't be taken back. One morning, about a month after the raid, she heard an engine. Just one. The sound rolled down the road like a memory. She went to the window and saw a single motorcycle stop at the end of her driveway. The rider was someone she didn't recognize, younger, maybe 30, wearing a patched vest, helmet off, hair tied back in a braid. Angela didn't move at first. She just watched, waiting for the roar of more engines behind him, but none came. After a moment, the rider dismounted, reached into a saddlebag, and pulled out a small box. He walked it to the porch, left it by the door, and then, without a word, turned and rode away. Inside the box were three things: a photo, a patch, and a letter. The photo was of her porch, taken that night before the storm ended. All 18 of them were there, the bikers she'd taken in, crowded together, some smiling, some scowling, all alive. She was in the middle of the frame, arms crossed, face tired but proud. The patch was from the Hells Angels. Not one she'd ever seen before. It was smaller, simpler, white wings on a black background, with a single line of stitching that read, "Honor the shelter." And the letter was short. "Angela, we never forgot what you did. You gave us warmth when the world froze. The ones who left you behind were scared, not ungrateful. Some of us came together, changed the rules, made something new. The house stands for something now. Keep it safe. We'll keep our word. See." Angela sat with that letter for a long time. She read it over and over until she could recite it from memory. Then she pinned the patch to the inside of her coat, not to wear it for others to see, but to feel its weight against her heart. It didn't make the pain disappear. It didn't erase the betrayal or the way the town looked at her. But it gave her something else, something harder, stronger, truer. A kind of peace that didn't come from forgiveness, but from understanding. The thaw came early that year. The roads turned to rivers of meltwater, and the fields shimmered with the first hints of green. Angela repaired her porch, repainted the door, and started planting again, not because she thought anyone would come back, but because it felt right. Because life, no matter how much it's battered, keeps pushing through the cracks. Then, one night near the start of spring, the engines returned. Not hundreds this time, just a handful. 6 or 7 riders, headlights cutting through the dusk. Angela stood on her porch as they parked at the end of the drive. The leader, a woman this time, wearing the same black and white patch, stepped forward and raised a gloved hand in greeting. Angela didn't speak. She just nodded, and the woman nodded back. They didn't ask to come inside. They didn't bring chaos or noise. They simply built a fire in the open field, sat around it, and stayed through the night, keeping watch on the horizon like sentinels. By morning, they were gone again, leaving only ashes and a folded note by the door, for every storm, a light. Angela smiled when she read it. Not because she felt redeemed, but because she finally understood, the house wasn't cursed. It wasn't haunted by what had happened. It had become something else entirely. A marker. A story passed from one soul to another. In the months that followed, Angela's life changed in small, quiet ways. A journalist from out of town came by once, asking questions about the night the bikers came. She didn't tell him much. Just that it had been cold, that she had opened her door, and that sometimes the people you save don't stay, but the saving still matters. She started getting letters again, not from the angels, but from strangers. Bikers, truckers, people who had heard fragments of the story. Some thanked her. Some confessed their own regrets. Some said they'd been there that night, in spirit, in memory, in solidarity. She never replied to most of them. But every now and then, when one letter hit too close to the truth, she would write back a single line, "You do what you can with the storm that finds you." The town never apologized. People rarely do. But slowly, over time, the edges softened. Someone from the church brought her extra seed for her garden. The grocery clerk started asking how she'd been. A child once left a drawing of her house taped to the front door, covered in stick figures with wings. Angela kept it. She didn't rebuild her life, she built a new one entirely. One shaped not by fear of what had happened, but by acceptance that some stories never really end, they just keep echoing, changing the people who carry them. And maybe that's what redemption looks like, not a single act, not forgiveness from others, but the quiet resolve to stay open, to keep sheltering the world even after it breaks your heart. Angela Morris did not become a legend. She didn't want to be one. But for those who came after, those who rode through the storms and found her light in the distance, she became something rarer, a truth whispered on the road. That when the world turns cold, someone will open their door. And that kindness, once given, can outlive the storm. If this part of Angela's story moved you, don't just listen, act. Be the shelter. The smallest kindness can change more than you'll ever see. Years passed, and the story of the storm became less a memory and more a legend that lived on the wind. Time did what it always does, it softened the edges, reshaped the wounds, and left behind only the truths strong enough to endure. Angela Morris grew older, her hair silvering like the frost that once covered her porch, her hands slower but still steady. She never moved away from the house. People asked her why she stayed, why she didn't sell it, why she didn't start over somewhere new. She always gave the same answer, because storms always find you. Might as well meet them where you stand. The town had changed, too. Slowly, awkwardly, but it had. A new mayor came in, younger, less suspicious of the world beyond their narrow streets. The old rumors lost their bite. People began to tell the story differently. It was no longer about a dangerous woman who invited outlaws into her home. It became about a nurse who refused to let men die in the snow. A woman who gave shelter when everyone else had locked their doors. The narrative shifted, from fear to reverence, from scandal to respect. One spring, a group of local bikers, not angels, just young riders from nearby towns, came to her door with paint and lumber. They said they wanted to rebuild the fence that the storm and the years had taken down. She let them. When they finished, one of them asked if they could put up a small sign. Angela agreed. They hung it on the post near the gate, simple wood, letters burned into the grain. Morris House, shelter always. She never touched it after that. Never polished or repainted it. She wanted it to weather naturally, to age with the land. Sometimes, she'd wake up in the middle of the night to the faint hum of engines in the distance. Never close, never threatening, just passing. She'd go to the window, see the lights fading into the horizon, and smile. The patch still hung in her hallway, framed now, beside the photo of that night. The world beyond the town changed even faster. The biker community evolved, the old factions fractured, rebuilt, and redefined themselves. Somewhere along the way, a quiet tradition began. Riders who found themselves stranded in storms would leave small white wing patches behind at places where they'd been given shelter. Gas stations. Motels. Strangers' porches. No one ever claimed the idea. But anyone who knew the legend of the storm understood where it began. Angela never took credit. She didn't want it. But one winter, she received a letter from a woman named Clara, the same woman who had once stood at the head of that small group of bikers who returned to her field months after the raid. Clara wrote. "We made it a creed now. No one freezes alone. We ride under a different name, but every patch we wear carries what you gave us. It isn't about outlaw or brotherhood anymore. It's about shelter. About seeing people when the world looks away. You changed the road, Angela. You changed us." Angela read it by the fire, and for the first time in years, she cried. Not from grief, but from relief. Because she understood now that her small act, that one decision to open her door, had rippled outward into something vast and unstoppable. The world would forget her name. Legends don't hold names forever. But her story would remain, woven into the fabric of countless roads, carried in the hearts of strangers she would never meet. When she passed, quietly one autumn evening, she left no will, no instructions. Just a small note pinned to the kitchen table. If the storm comes again, the door is open. The local riders held her funeral. They came from towns across the state, leather and denim, boots dusted with road salt, patches faded but proud. Some rode old bikes that coughed and sputtered, others rode sleek machines that gleamed like glass. They parked in a wide circle around the house, engines silent, heads bowed. Then one by one, they took off their patches, not to bury them, but to nail them into the wooden fence around her garden. The fence that had once been rebuilt with their hands. By dusk, the entire fence shimmered with wings. White, black, red, every color, every kind. From the road, it looked like the house itself had grown feathers. Years later, travelers passing through that small town still stop at the old Morris property. Some don't even know why, they just feel drawn to it. They leave offerings, flowers, food, patches, helmets, candles. No signs tell them to. No guidebooks mention it. The story carries itself. The locals still keep the place. They don't charge entry. They don't talk much about what happened. But if you ask one of the old-timers about the woman who lived there, they'll tell you this. She wasn't trying to change the world. She just kept her door open. And maybe that's all it takes. Because kindness, real kindness, doesn't fade. It multiplies in the lives it touches. The storm that once threatened to destroy Angela Morris became the very thing that gave her legend breath. Now, every time a rider sees snow on the horizon, somewhere deep in their heart they hear a whisper, a reminder of a woman who faced a blizzard with nothing but her courage, her house, and a will to do what was right. A reminder that no matter how dark the night becomes, there's always someone, somewhere, who will leave the light on. And that's how she lives on. Not in stories told around fires or on the road, but in every moment a stranger opens their door and says, "Come in, you're safe here." If Angela's story reached you, let it move through you. Be someone's shelter. Open your door, not just your home, but your heart. Because the storms never stop coming, but neither does the light we choose to share. Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons.